Hello, welcome to Washington Talk. I'm Ji Ha-ham. As the U.S. strengthens its Indo-Pacific strategy, the collaboration among the U.S., South Korea, and Japan is becoming increasingly tangible, notably through enhanced trilateral security cooperation and the recent launch of a new monitoring mechanism for North Korean sanctions led by the three countries. Meanwhile, North Korea has announced plans to deploy 250 new tactical ballistic missile launchers to its front lines. Today, we'll discuss these and more.
So we will approach this by continuing to consult with our allies and partners and continue to make clear that it's not just the United States.
특수한 물리적 힘 전술에게 실용적 측면에서도 효과성을 제거하게 돼요.
In the studio with me, Dr. Kenneth Weinstein, Japan Chair at Hudson Institute. Dr. Weinstein previously served as president and CEO of Hudson. He was also the chair of the Broadcasting Board of Governors, the oversight body for U.S. international broadcasting, now known as the U.S. Agency for Global Media. In March 2020, Dr. Weinstein was nominated by President Trump to serve as U.S. ambassador to Japan. Also joining us, Colonel David Maxwell, the vice president at the Center for Asia-Pacific Strategy. He's a member of the board of directors of the Committee for Human Rights in North Korea. Colonel Maxwell was a military planner for the ROK U.S. Combined Forces Command. Welcome to the program.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Anthony Blinken, Lloyd Austin, and Jake Sullivan recently emphasized the importance of strengthening the security cooperation between the U.S., South Korea, and Japan in a Washington Post op-ed. Given your recent meeting with President Yoon Suk-yeol, how do you think South Korea and Japan can contribute further to enhancing stability and prosperity in the Indo-Pacific? What insights did your discussions with President Yoon provide regarding their potential roles?
Well, thank you. Look, first you talked about the op-ed in the Washington Post by Secretaries Blinken, Austin, and National Security Advisor Sullivan. They stressed the upgrading of U.S. diplomacy in the Indo-Pacific from the old hub and spoke diplomacy, which the U.S. really directed, to the integrated, interconnected network of partnerships, whether it be AUKUS, whether it be the U.S., Japan, South Korea, trilateral, the U.S., Japan, Philippines, trilateral, the Quad, IPEF, working with allies and partners to confront shared challenges. And the list of achievements include increases in defense investment in Japan, South Korea's increased economic engagement in Southeast Asia, U.S.-Philippines military cooperation, and the like. As for President Yoon, I was honored to host a discussion with him at the NATO summit, and what's clear is he emphasized the need really to work to strengthen the trilateral to meet the growing challenges of North Korea, particularly the Russia-North Korea military and economic cooperation, which is achieved an absolute level of massive development in the last few months with North Korean assistance to Ukraine. There's obviously a focus on the U.S.-China rivalry, which he sees as a strategic competition involving technology, information economics. President Yoon stressed that while the ROK will continue to communicate with China on a strategic level based on mutual respect and reciprocity, that there's also going to be a focus on regional peace and global agendas. And lastly, he talked about how South Korea would work through international partnerships such as the Mineral Securities Partnership and IPEF to try to bring prosperity to the region, particularly as South Korea hosts APEC next year.
Colonel Maxwell, the Biden administration has shifted from a traditional hub and spoke model to a more integrated network of alliances and partnerships. Do you believe this approach has approached significant result? And how has it impacted U.S. diplomacy in the region?
Yeah, so I think that the signature foreign policy success of this administration is really the revitalization of alliances. And I think that they have adapted, and as Dr. Weinstein has laid out, all the various organizations that are interconnected and layered. Some call this a lattice work. I don't like that analogy. I think that a lattice is too weak. I like to think of this as a silk web that is both strong and flexible. And I think that that is really what has revitalized our alliances as well as our partnerships with our, of course, our 5 treaty alliances as the backbone of all of this. And so I think that it's really going to, the mutual defense and mutual prosperity going forward will really be enhanced by these relationships. I think that it's also important to remember that it's not just security alone. It is economic as well. And I think that it really allows all these various countries to work through myriad organizations from ASEAN to the United Nations in support of mutual interests. And the one common mutual interest, I think, is support to the rules-based international order. And I think that's the fundamental interest that is common to all of us.
Dr. Weinstein, as South Korea and Japan align with the U.S. Indo-Pacific strategy, what opportunities and challenges do they face? Could this approach, which aligns more closely against China and Russia, complicate their diplomatic relations, or might it increase their leverage?
Sure, I think it's going to increase their leverage. First, the trilateral cooperation gives South Korea more power to face off against this growing North Korea-Russia partnership, which, as I said earlier, is getting much more serious. And the 3 countries activated a data sharing mechanism to allow for real-time data on North Korean ballistic missiles. In December of last year, they had a multi-domain trilateral exercise, Freedom's Edge, in June of this year, which focused on cooperative ballistic missile defense, air defense, anti-submarine warfare, defensive cyber training. There was the memorandum of cooperation that was signed between the 3 defense ministers when they met at the Shangri-La Dialogue in June in Singapore. There's also a trilateral economic dialogue that focuses on responses to economic coercion and sensitive technology protection, scientific cooperation. The challenge is obviously there's South Korea President Yoon has been very forward-leaning on this, but his popularity rating, unfortunately, is at an all-time low of 29% as of now, and his party had a landslide defeat in the general elections in April. And then there's the question of China's relations with both South Korea and Japan. The question is how to balance what is the largest economic partner for both of those countries with the need to help counter Chinese coercion. And that's the real challenge.
Colonel Maxwell, AUKUS and the Quad are key to the Biden administration's strategy, but South Korea is not officially a part of it either, except for loose involvement with no plans for official expansion at the moment. Given the regional threat, including China and Russia's aggression, would integrating South Korea into these arrangements enhance security? Is this integration likely an ongoing discussion?
So the Quad and AUKUS are important, but what is most important to the U.S. strategy are our 5 alliances. Again, the alliances are the bedrock, the foundation for our mutual security. Quad was really developed for an economic focus, and it provides very important benefits to the 4 countries. AUKUS was really established for a technological focus, technology exchange among the U.S., the U.K., and Australia, particularly as it regards to nuclear-powered submarines. South Korea is working with all of these members. And I do believe that I'm certain that there's diplomatic discussions that are ongoing among all the countries. But whether South Korea formally joins or not is not as important as the cooperation that exists. And this is why, again, I think that the multiple relationships, what is, I think, most important for South Korea is the trilateral cooperation with Japan and the US, because that also integrates with AUKUS and Quad and the like. So this Silk Web, again, is strong and flexible and really gives a lot of strength and power to all the members.
Dr. Weinstein, Japan has been more proactive than South Korea in supporting the U.S. Indo-Pacific strategy, even with regarding a potential China-Taiwan conflict. Should South Korea geopolitical ties with China be taken into account, or should both countries offer equally active support against China and Russia?
Look, under President Moon, you couldn't even, the South Koreans refused to have a free and open Indo-Pacific strategy because they viewed it as a counter to China, and the Moon administration didn't want to upset the Chinese. President Yoon, on the other hand, adopted a free and open Indo-Pacific strategy for South Korea, but I think we understand that in the United States that there's a division of labor between our alliances, and that South Korea's dire threat comes from the north, and that the Korean Peninsula is their neighbors, and the focus of the ROK military and of the U.S. ROK alliance has to be on deterring North Korea, and even in the event of a Taiwan contingency. That puts massive pressure on us and on the alliance, and it's important likewise for Japan to do all that it can to assist in the case of a Taiwan contingency. So the ROK is certainly, it's understandable that they're reluctant at this stage to allow for U.S. military deployments from South Korea for a cross-state contingency. And certainly there's no real serious examination of what Korea's role would be in a cross-strait contingency as well in terms of actually sending troops at this stage. So, but I think we understand this and certainly don't expect both countries to play an equal role if there is a Taiwan contingency. In the case of Russia, as Colonel Maxwell has said, South Korea has really stepped up, particularly through its arms industry in terms of assistance to Ukraine and to NATO. It's been extraordinary and remarkable, and something the Japanese are actually jealous of as they look to move to becoming a defense exporter. It's really a role model for them.
Colonel Maxwell, the Trilateral Security Cooperation Framework marks the first formal military cooperation among the U.S., South Korea, and Japan. Some in South Korea, though, express concerns about being drawn into U.S.-Japan alliance framework or unnecessarily targeting China. How do you perceive these criticisms?
Well, frankly, I think the criticisms are ill-informed. First of all, President Yoon and Prime Minister Kishida deserve great credit for the political courage that they have shown to enhance the national security and national prosperity of both their countries by participating in this trilateral framework. I think that is really, really important, and it is in the best interest of both countries, from their views, in my opinion. I don't think there should not be any fear of being drawn into an alliance. If South Korea decides that it wants to participate in an alliance, South Korea will make that decision. They're not going to be tricked. They're not going to be drawn in. We should also remember how China feels about this arrangement and these alliances. We should remember in 2017, the previous South Korean administration was taken to task by Xi Jinping with the 3 no's. No more THAAD deployment, no integrated missile defense, and no trilateral alliance. That is a threat to China, is a trilateral alliance, because the strength of that alliance would be so powerful. Now, we're not at an alliance stage, we're at a trilateral cooperation stage. And this is really important. And one of the aspects of this, of course, is integrated missile defense. Again, something China does not want, but it is something that we are moving towards because, again, that is in the mutual interests and mutual defense of all 3 countries. So I don't think we should think about this criticism as well informed. And I think that all three countries are going to act in their own best interest. And I think also, as a threat to China, we should remember the December 2022 Indo-Pacific strategy of South Korea. And they only mentioned China in passing, just the way that you described it, a special relationship. But they mentioned defending the rules-based international order 11 times. And that's really what the focus is. So China can choose to be a responsible member of the international community, and it can trade, or if it chooses to continue to be a malign actor, then South Korea is going to act in its own best interest. So, and the trilateral framework, security framework, really provides South Korea, Japan, and the United States with defensive capabilities that have never before existed.
Dr. Weinstein, Japan-South Korea relations have historically been the weakest link in the security cooperation with the U.S. While President Yoon and Prime Minister Kishida have focused on national interest over historical issues, tensions and distrust still persist, along with unease in South Korea about Japan's military strengthening. Can they overcome these barriers for a lasting partnership? And should the U.S. Play a more active role?
It's what Yoon and Kishida have done, as Colonel Maxwell says, absolutely historic. Now it's time to build it out, and not just as being done, cooperation between the three defense ministers and the agreement that was signed in Shangri-La last month. The key thing now is to move forward and to encourage educational exchanges, to encourage business partnerships between major Korean and Japanese companies, to encourage more public diplomacy so that people from both countries really get to know each other, get to work with each other, build up relations of trust. That should be done through the bureaucracy and all sorts of different ways of trying to institutionalize things. It should be done at the business level. It should be done at the people-to-people exchange level to try to really move past, to the extent it's possible, the very sensitive historic issues.
Colonel Maxwell, given the differing views of the U.S. presidential candidates on alliances, could this security cooperation between the U.S., South Korea, and Japan lose momentum after the election? Can this cooperation be institutionalized, regardless of the outcome?
We have to be careful as we talk about this. I believe we need to institutionalize the framework for the purposes of ensuring military cooperation, interoperability, diplomatic activities. The three militaries have a 5-year exercise plan. That institutionalizes our planning. However, I have to take exception to the idea that we are going to institutionalize this with a view towards who the next president would be. Decisions, we are three democracies, and whoever is the president is going to make decisions based on his or her assessment of our national security. And while we may not agree with that, we are a democracy, and our values are that our elected civilian political leaders make the decisions, not our military, not our diplomats, not the National Security Council, but the elected political leaders. And so the professionals in the military, in the State Department, will make the case for why this is important, but we cannot think about trying to institutionalize as a way to entrap a future leader so that he cannot or she cannot back out of the frameworks that have been established. We must live by our values. I believe this framework is important, and I believe our professionals will argue for its importance, but ultimately, all three countries as democracies, our civilian elected political leaders will make those decisions. And I, for one, would much rather live in the chaos of democracy than under the authoritarian rule of something like the guerrilla dynasty and Gulag state of North Korea.
Dr. Weinstein, the U.S., South Korea, and Japan plan to launch a new mechanism to replace the UN panel of experts on North Korea sanctions, which was stalled by Russia's veto. Is this initiative an extension of trilateral cooperation? And what significance do you attribute to it?
Yeah, if I could say one thing back on what Colonel Maxwell said. Look, President Trump completely backed the U.S., Japan, South Korea trilateral cooperation, had his national security advisors meet every few months. with his Korean and Japanese counterparts, because he believes in the importance of this trilateral cooperation. And I see no reason that it would change from everything I know about the direction of policy. Look, this is not an official proposal quite yet from the three governments, but the idea really is to continue the UN's work, which was very effective in the 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020 period. It would be operated by the US, Japan, and South Korea. It would be joined by like-minded countries like Australia and New Zealand to try to figure out new options inside and outside the UN and not allow the panel of experts work to lapse. I see it as kind of parallel to the work the G7 was doing in Ukraine because of the UN's failure on Ukraine to try to coordinate and move economic sanctions and other efforts forward.
Colonel Maxwell, can a sanctions regime led by the US, South Korea, and Japan overcome the challenges posed by China and Russia? What are the advantages and difficulties of establishing such a system outside the UN framework?
Well, the answer is really in your question. If China and Russia don't cooperate, it's very hard to do. And even, frankly speaking, even in those years of 2016, 17, 18, when China and Russia were nominally supporting sanctions, they still weren't perfect, but that doesn't mean we can't try. And I think that this is an important initiative that's being proposed. I think it can have an effect. It can prevent some of the sanctions evasions activities, particularly ship-to-ship transfer and the like. But the key element that all three countries, if they had the political will to execute, would be in the financial area and targeting banks that support North Korea. That is a very powerful capability, but it's one that is fraught with political difficulties. But that could really make a difference in pressuring North Korea.
North Korea's deployment of 250 new tactical ballistic missile launchers highlights the need for practical security cooperation between the US, South Korea, and Japan. With the potential to launch up to 1,000 missiles simultaneously, how significant is the threat to South Korea's defense system? What are the limitations?
Well, 1,000 missiles simultaneously is something no one can defend against. Not Israel, not Iron Dome. No one can defend against simultaneous launch of 1,000 missiles. I think it's important to understand that North Korea has talked about planning to deploy 250 launchers. We have not seen that yet. And by stating this and doing this, we must understand North Korea's political warfare and blackmail diplomacy strategy, as well as its warfighting capabilities. And I, for one, think that part of this is really to try to drive a wedge in the alliance, try to weaken the alliance, as well as blackmail diplomacy, which is the use of threats, increased tensions and provocations to gain political and economic concessions. So in our national intelligence estimate in 2023 really outlined how it uses its nuclear capabilities for its blackmail diplomacy strategies to coerce effects that it desires. I also wonder when North Korea does something like this, what are they doing that they don't want us to see? And that's something that's very important. All warfare is based on deception. And when North Korea presents these kind of statements and activities, we have to wonder what is it that they're hiding and they're not showing us and that they don't want us to see. And so it's very important for our intelligence community to remain vigilant and look at what is not being discussed.
Okay, well, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That does it for today's Washington Talk. Please join us again next week for more analysis.